Here's your smart fact of the day. So, if you look at all the wonderful partnerships in the world, whether it is Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, or Al Rees and Jack Trout, the marketing gurus, or even the partnership between Sachin and Dravid, do you think those guys were being mirrors to each other, which means replicating each other's skills, or were they extensions to each other, which means complementing each other's skills? Welcome to Smarter with Sid, and in this episode, we are going to figure out what is mirroring versus extending, and does it help scaling, and does it help success? So let's go. Yeah. In fact, just to set the context over here, because at Smarter with Sid, what we do is we set the context first, then we try to figure out whether there's a first principle or two, which can be a truth that we can take home. And then we see its applicability all within, 10 minutes. So my time is limited, so I'm going to go with setting the context. So if you see the marketing gurus, Al Rees and Jack Trout, and if you actually understand how they came together and how they wrote those books, they were very successful marketing and advertising agency executives. And what they did was that they came together, they brainstormed, and they pretty much were, they had similar skill sets. So when they wrote their famous books around positioning and the rest of it, they were mirroring each other. And I think they were pretty successful. Now, I just want to confuse you, because setting the context, what if there's no confusion around setting the context, right? What's the fun in that? So if I look at Al Rees and Jack Trout, they never were partners beyond writing a few books. But the longer lasting relationship that Al Rees actually had was with his daughter, who's Laura Rees, and with whom he wrote a lot of other books and made a successful venture, probably even more successful than what he had with Jack Trout. Now, I believe that Laura Rees was extending Al Rees's scale, because she was bringing complementary skills to the table. Now, this is the whole thing between mirroring and extending, and you can do it with people. So whether you are a founding member of a rocking startup, or whether you are part of a project team working in a large corporate, or whether you are trying to set up a partnership with your sibling or with your best friend, one of the core aspects that we need to consider is once we prove the core value, once we prove whatever we've got out there in the market, whether it is, some product that you've got or service that you've got or whatever you're selling, and once you've sold it to a client or two and you want to scale, what works better? Does mirroring work better, or does extending work better? Now, let me be very clear what I mean by mirroring and extending in this specific example. It means, okay, let's just assume that you've set up some shop, and now you want to convert it into a franchise, and you are two partners, and you're trying to figure out how do you increase the number of shops you've got, or get partnerships or alliances going, and the rest of it. Now, if the two partners have skills that mirror each other, they could run around all over the country from whichever city they're in. And because their skill sets mirror each other, they can move at a rapid scale or rapid pace. So there's something to be said about mirroring. Now, if the two partners were having complementary skills, then they would have to divide the work differently. They would say, okay, in order for us to expand our operations across the country, I am going to look at making the most robust operational and logistical situation, which is the skill set of one partner, let's say. And the second guy, who is more outward facing, client facing, more of an extrovert, will say, okay, I'm going to go out and meet up with specific alliances and partnerships all across the country. So you're dividing the same work differently, isn't it? So as I've said, by giving this example, you can see that both mirroring and extending can actually work. So what is the right kind of partner for you? Is it a mirror or an extension? Isn't it a wicked problem to solve? Now, whenever I am stuck at trying to go down to first principles, I try to look at any sort of sports analogy, and my favorite sport being cricket. Here's a cricket analogy, but the sport, if it's a doubles tennis thing or whatever it may be, if it's a football game, you'll still have a lot of sports analogies that talk about fantastic partnerships. And if I look at, let's say, Sachin Tendulkar, who was clearly more attacking as a batsman, partnering with Rahul Dravid, the wall, being defensive, you suddenly are in a situation wherein they're extending each other's skills. And look at the number of wonderful partnerships they've done, brought together for India. Now, if you look at Sachin and Sehwag, for instance, now they are mirroring each other. In fact, when Sehwag came onto the scene, he was known to be a clone of Sachin. So very similar. Sehwag probably even more aggressive than Sachin, but both of them aggressive. And they used to open the batting for India in one days for a longish period of time. Now, having said that, which works better? Of course, the context is what matters, because Sachin and Dravid worked really well in Test cricket, a longer form wherein you need to dig deep and bat out periods of time and the rest of it. While in one-day cricket, or the shorter form of the game, you can have a mirrored skill. So the most important thing for any partnership to actually succeed is to figure out whether mirroring each other is going to be useful in that specific context that you're in, the format that you're playing, the game that you're in, isn't it? And I think that is the first principle. Look at the surroundings around, right? Look at what is happening, and then look at your partner, or look at your potential partner. If it's a potential partner, well, at least you have a choice of not going ahead with that partnership. But let's imagine that you are stuck with that sibling of yours and say, hey, okay, are we really mirroring each other's skills, and is it useful here, or do we need to do something else? So look at the context. Another core aspect of people who don't end up extending and end up only mirroring is because they confuse the value system that the partnership has with the skill sets that the partnership requires. And I think this is a very common mistake, because if you look at the value system, that's why you are partners with somebody, right? But unfortunately, a lot of times people mirror your value system, but also mirror your skill set. What does that mean? That means that you are not going to get anything extra that you yourself don't have, even though your value systems might be fantastic and you may get along like a house on fire. Now, whenever any person who has a specific value system looks at the outside world and looks at potential partners, and they see complementary skills, they are also connected to values that he cannot recognize or she cannot recognize. And that's why they tend to shy away from people who have different skills but who can actually be great for the game. Why? Because those skills also end up being connected to certain values which they do not resonate with. Now, this is where a certain sort of maturity and maybe negotiation or compromise with yourself, not with your partner, actually is important as to what is it that you really want. What can your partner bring to the table? How can you make sure that there is a common meeting ground in your value systems, which is very important for any business. But you can, play on your complementary skills. It is a very, very important but subtle point that most partnerships or teams ignore. The third first principle, if there is such a thing, is what I feel extremely important is if you look at a team rather than a startup thing or a partnership thing, you might need some people who mirror you and some people who actually extend you. Like, for example, if you're the boss and if your second in command is an extension of you, maybe it may not work as well as if the second in command is a mirror of you, because the mirror eventually will replace you so that you can groom that person and you can move on to bigger things. But that mirror can also make sure that your presence is felt when you're doing other things. But you still need extenders in the team, which means everybody can't be a mirror. You need a combination of extenders and mirrors within a team. Now, can you not work with an extender if you're the boss? Of course you can, but then you need to configure the rest of your team very differently. See, the whole thing that I probably am concluding to, and the takeaway is understanding what the situation is, understanding who the people are, and awareness itself would bring about a solution that is unique to your needs. But do keep all of these factors in mind the next time you're trying to configure a team or configure a partnership or configure, a founding sort of startup setup, right? Well, I hope you liked this episode of mine on Smarter With Sid. Many more to come from where this one came from. And if you like me, well, please like and subscribe this podcast, as well as follow me on Instagram and LinkedIn. I'm known as the Traveling Professor. And hey, if you like podcasts like these, do go to ivmpodcast.com. They've got some wonderful stuff, just right there waiting for you. On that happy note then.